Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House. Alongside, as always, Mr. Martin Popoff. How's things in Canada, my friend?
Pretty good, pretty good. We definitely got winter here and some snow, but not like Buffalo's getting. Wow. They're supposed
Yeah,
to get 3 feet. They even moved the Bills game to Detroit because of it.
it's crazy, right? It's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah, we got maybe not even an inch here, and then it was gone by the next morning. So, but yeah, it's all moving upstate, and they're getting clobbered. So, yeah, it's kind of early for that. I don't know. I'm okay with winter coming in, but man, feet of snow? No, thanks. Not quite yet. Not quite yet. So we have a very interesting topic for you here today. It's kind of a loose topic that hopefully will spur lots of interest in all of you watching, and it'll take us down lots of avenues here over the next hour or so. So, Martin and I were talking, and we've had these kind of like little conversations many times in the past. You see comments on YouTube videos or on social media when people like us or who are writers, journalists, critics, personalities, that sort of thing, and not just us. Like I said, it could be anybody who's out in a public forum giving their opinions on things, and people will comment and they'll be like, well, who are you? Why am I listening to you? Why are you credible about what you're talking about? And we sometimes think, well, do our opinions really matter at all to anybody? And why do we give these opinions? And what gives us the right to have opinions on things? So we got to talking, and Martin, said, this might be a good idea for a show, and there's lots of points we can make about, why and how and all that sort of thing, and we can try and explain maybe why you guys watch us every single Friday, or why some of you watch the Contrarians week after week, and why some of you watch the Hudson Valley Squares or In the Prague Theater or whatever the show might be, or Rick Beato, or whoever. Right? There's plenty of people out there who give their opinions on music and movies and books and literature and sports and all that sort of thing. Why us, right? Well, today we're going to kind of talk a little bit specifically about Martin and myself. Why us? Maybe why you should give some desire to want to hear our opinions day in and day out, week in and week out. So with that, Martin, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that before we get started.
Yeah, this could go a lot of places. I mean, I was thinking I was originally going to do this as one of my history and 5 songs podcast things, and I was going to call it "Does My Opinion Matter?" But then I thought I want to know what Pete has to say about this. So it's like, so it could be called now "Do Our Opinions Matter?" And then I was thinking this morning, it's like maybe call it "Who Cares What Pete and Martin Think?" Right? So yeah, this comes about it. This can be looked at a number of different ways, but yeah, I'm always fascinated by sometimes you get people that they just don't care at all about record reviews, period. Like they just don't care about other people's opinion, and they'll go out and check it out themselves. And I wanted to look at a little bit of the pros and cons of why people would listen to us and not. And one of the first analogies I always thought of is when you're watching an NFL panel and you've got the guy who came up through broadcasting. So you think, okay, well, I don't really care what he thinks that much. I mean, he's maybe the lower on the totem pole sort of thing. You've got like an ex quarterback. So you're thinking, okay, well, that's the guy who really kind of, looks at the game. And maybe if he's won a Super Bowl, he matters even more, right? So the analogy is the musician in the band, or a musician who can look at other bands or whatever. Maybe you've got an ex-coach. Maybe you've got an ex-coach who's actually played, so he's banged some heads, and so you think, okay, well, he has even more validity, right? So when people say to us like, who cares what you think? Sometimes I think, yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, we're not rock stars, right? We're not literally in the band itself that we're talking about. So that's maybe the highest level of what people care about. Or we're not a peer of these guys, or we're not a big band. There's rock stars who haven't got gold and platinum records. And then, when we're criticizing Def Leppard, sometimes I often get well, how many diamond albums have you put out? How many millions of records have you sold, right? Like, who are you to say anything, right? So maybe reasons to listen to us or not. And so this is gonna be loose. I've got a bunch of notes, but maybe I'll start with one where I've got a prop that'll maybe help me, and I'll try to keep this point really compact. Here's the prop. It's my absolutely chaotic REM collection, right? 2 copies of Adventures in Hi-Fi, Life's Rich Pageant. I apparently have 2 copies of that. I think my vinyl's long gone. Automatic for the People. It's funny. I've got 3 copies of Monster. It's like, so at one point I knew a lot about REM. If you would have said, oh, Martin, let's do a show on REM. If you were asking me in 1990, I probably could have been an expert and done a good show on it. So, but I'm not an expert at all. Okay, so I kind of was an expert, but you forget things as well. So there's a lot of bands a lot about that you forgot a lot about, and you can't just talk off the top of your head. You're gonna have to make notes. But my point with this one is, you shouldn't listen to us when it's something we're not an expert on. And what you do so great, Pete, with the show is like, you make the show high value when you have a panel, right? When you have a bunch of people, a bunch of Hudson Valley Squares are in the prog scene. And so the idea is, we all recognize our limitations, and we realize, there are certain things you shouldn't listen to us on. Our opinion doesn't matter because we're not informed, right? Or our opinion is we think we're informed enough to be 1/6 of a panel. Like we're 1/6 smart on this band. But when you listen to a bunch of, the in the prog seat guys, and you hear the depth of knowledge and stuff, that's where an opinion gets better and better and better, because we all recognize our limitations, and we put these panels together. So when you have a Hudson Valley Squares or the Fusion show, even, right? I mean, my God, I mean, that stuff, right? When you have a few people together and they're all contributing, that's when an opinion can really matter. So I'll leave it there, and I'll let you talk. But that was my first point, is that our opinion doesn't matter when we don't know a lot about something. And frankly, you hear us all the time, sounding relatively smart on a topic, because we're talking about a topic we think we know something about, and you don't get to see the dozens and dozens and hundreds of bands we don't talk about because we don't know anything about them. Right. I'll turn over to you.
I love the fact that you started us off with that, because this is something that needs to be talked about here, because I see comments all the time. Pete or Martin, we love your show, but why won't you do a show on this band or this style? The punk thing is a perfect example. I get people all the time. It's like, Pete, I wish you would do more shows on punk. I know you have a couple people like Martin, like Chuck Alvarez, maybe a couple others, who really like punk music. And there's so many punk fans out there. We want you to talk more about punk. I don't know anything about punk. Very, very little, right? So again, it's exactly what you said. I'm not going to talk, it's one thing if I want to do a specialty show, like we had, you and Simon do the Stranglers show not that long ago, where I kind of hosted and you guys did your thing. But I can't do that all the time, because I want to be involved in what's going on. I want to know, I want to be able to talk intelligently about the music and the bands that are the focus of the episode. So there's that. We also get, in putting together shows for Hudson Valley Squares and for In the Prog Seat, there are very oftentimes topics where someone on that regular panel is not very informed on, that they don't know much about it. So they and this is the way to do it. They like, what? This is not really going to be my week, because I really don't know all that much about that band. I'm going to sit this one out. And then we get people who are like, well, where is that? Why weren't they there on this episode? They're so missed. Well, the reason why they did not appear on that episode is because they don't have enough to say. They don't know enough about the particular band. And what Martin said before is very, very true. When you have a collection of people who are very passionate and knowledgeable about a topic, again, whether it's an album, a band, a style of music, a movie, whatever, it's a great conversation because everybody's contributing. They're all sharing in their knowledge and their ideas and their opinions. But it's always very clear when you have someone on a panel that really isn't all that well versed in the topic, it sticks out like a sore thumb. So that's why you will see people who, you know, may not appear on certain episodes, specifically talking about here on the channel. But I'm sure it's the same thing on the Contrarians, right? You put together panels of people on a specific topic who are very well versed in that. And it's good when you have a wide cast of people that you can choose from, because those people can appear on the episode that's best suited for them. So do their opinions matter? Yes, because they really know what they're talking about, or whatever that particular topic might be. So I think people I think need to understand that. Your REM thing is a perfect example. I'm not an REM fan. You were a fan back in the day, but maybe not all that hip to what they're doing these days. So for someone to ask you and I to do a show on REM, you got someone who doesn't like them, doesn't know anything about them, and someone who maybe hasn't followed them in quite a long time. Not a very good recipe for success there, right?
Yeah.
There are probably people that are better able to do something like that on that particular subject area. So yeah, it's a good start to this conversation, I think.
Okay, I've got another compartmentalized point that I'll make now then. So also the musician thing. You often get well, you don't play an instrument, like what do you know, right? It's like, well, okay, you don't know this, but I am a drummer, so let's keep it there for a second. So, and I've got my guitar hack cup going here. So Hack is a guitarist. Pete is a guitarist. Pete knows a lot about guitars. So does Hack. They both know a lot about effects as well. So here's kind of the hierarchy going back to the NFL thing. We love having Mike Portnoy on, right? This is a guy that is a massive music fan, one of the greatest drummers of all time, but also has known a million band people, and he's been in lots of bands and stuff as well. So he's, there's like the perfect guy that you really want to. I'm kind of building a hierarchy here. There's a guy like that where it's like, yeah, I am interested in his opinion, right? There's also the hierarchy of, if we're going to talk about Judas Priest, a member of Judas Priest is someone who's a opinion we care a lot about, right? So that's pretty cool as well. But when Pete and I talked about putting the show together, that's not the only opinion you want. Like say I write a book on Judas Priest, right? And say Rob Halford writes a book on Judas Priest. Rob Halford's book is only from his point of view. It's probably not going to be very negative about things. So you're only going to get, what he knows. When I do it, I'm going to bring in all those different opinions. So you're going to get lots of different opinions. KK does a book, you get his opinion. And even just in interviewing some of these guys, some of them are really insightful, some of them aren't. So, okay, so there's the guy in the band. There's a Mike Portnoy, who's a great musician. Lower down the totem pole, there are people like Pete and Hack and myself who, when we talk about an album, so what I'm saying here is there's a rock critic, right? So there's a rock critic who plays nothing, who we will get into what they can bring to the table, but also there's a rock critic like ourselves who can actually talk a little bit of tech and technique. And drums and drum sounds, and the hi-hat a little open, and triggering and crash and ride and all that kind of stuff, and what effects are happening on things. So when you are a bit of a musician or somewhat of a musician, you can definitely bring that to it. When you're a better musician, like on Contrarians, we've had Sean Kelly come on and just kill it with some really, really good episodes where he can really talk, because he's a virtuoso and he knows gear and everything, and he really knows songwriting. So you can really talk about stuff a lot. I want to bring up another guy who we've had on the Contrarians, a buddy of mine who now I'm using in some of my panel, because I'm starting these panel book things up again. But Ralph Chapman can do a really amazing show as well. And he's part of it's musician and part of it's just being really insightful and really thinking about lyrics and emotions and what's going on. But he said something that I noticed that Marco from the Contrarians brought up the other day. He says, ever since Ralph said this, I do this all the time. I thought it was a really good idea. So if you want to be a great critic on stuff, Ralph says, listen to a song, listen to the whole thing through, pay only attention to the vocals, listen to the whole thing through, only listen to the bass, whole thing through, guitar. Go listen to the guitar solos only on this album. go listen to the drums only on this album, go listen to the production only on that song, right? You go through the song 5-6 times, you're going to learn a lot from it. So yeah, I guess this compartmentalized thing is I want to say that there are these hierarchies of what different people will bring to a discussion based on what they know. And then even like a rock critic, a straight rock critic, like let's just look like a pure rock critic, that guy's gone out or gal has gone out and read a bunch of books on the band. They've maybe been there since the beginning. They've played all the albums. They've compared the stuff. They spent a lot of time doing homework to do what they do, to write that review or write that book or whatever it is, or do that video show on the band. So yes, you should listen to someone's opinion simply because they went out and did the homework and prepared for the show. So that's important as well.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll stop it there on that one.
I mean, the whole rock critic thing is an interesting discussion in itself, because you have, and you can usually tell, you have these rock critics that are out there that are fans to an extent, but to them, being a rock critic is a job, right? So I'm going to go out and listen to and review all of these albums, all this music across multiple genres. I may not be a true fan of a lot of it, but it's my job to go and review this stuff and talk about it. You have the other rock critic, which I kind of like to think that people like ourselves are. We are true fans. We grew up being fans. We kind of stay in a certain genre of music. We have spent most of our adult and childhood lives kind of poring over information and stats about, I had this conversation at the gym the other day. I met a guy casually. He knows someone else I know at the gym. And then like 2 months ago, he came up to me. He goes, I was on YouTube the other day and I saw one of your videos. And I'm like, holy cow, that's the guy that I met at the gym. And so he was talking to me the other day, and he goes, how do you know so much about all the stuff that you talk about? He goes, I know like the albums and the songs, but I don't know who plays on what. I don't know when it came out, the producers. I don't know any of this stuff. And I said, well, growing up, I remember buying records and immersing myself in liner notes. And, who played on what instruments they played on, who produced it, the year it came out. And you over decades of doing that, you get to a point where, you know a lot about this stuff. I mean, Martin, you've written tons of books on all these, you have to kind of, if you're going to kind of go that route, that's what you have to do. But that's having a passion for not just the music itself, but everything about it, the genesis of it, the production of it, the tours, all that sort of thing, the ins and outs, the lineup changes, all that sort of thing. So you have rock critics or music critics who kind of fall in that line, right? They are true fans as well. Then you have rock critics who, I hate to use this term, but they're fanboys of certain artists. And they will talk gushingly on end about whoever those artists are. Everything else sucks, negative, that sort of thing. And they stick out like a sore thumb. To me, I don't know how true of a rock critic, of a music critic you are, if you really only like a select group of things or music or bands, and everything else kind of, haphazardly you will give a true review of or an opinion on. So yeah, it's really interesting to talk about, critics and how many different type of critics there are out there. And again, it comes back to which opinion matters most to you, the reader, the viewer, the listener. Someone who is not all that tied directly to anything in general, but it's just looking at everything with a clean slate and say, if it sounds good to my ears, boom, 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 I'm going to listen to it, tell you what I think. Or someone who has a real passion for the type of music that it is, and is going to, maybe give you their slightly biased opinion, but the biased opinion is because they just have a love for the genre itself or for music in general. Or someone who really only cares about certain things, but they're going to look at and critique a large mass of things. I don't know. I mean, we could talk forever about this part of it, I think, because there's so much out there.
Okay, so I'll add a point, and then I've got another good compartmentalized one. But and then there are critics who can, in a line or two, just absolutely change your mind about a band. Like just say something so brilliant that it's like, I never thought about them that way. I love this band all of a sudden simply because of that one sentence that critic
And
said.
that's
That's
an
the
art.
extreme example.
To be
Yeah,
able to do that is an art. That is
yeah.
not easy. That is not easy.
Exactly. To really explain something in a really cool, deep way where that gets you appreciating that band again. I mean, I think that's the main value of a critic, is to make you go back and appreciate these things you bought with greater appreciation and a richer appreciation. They're comparing things left and right. They're interpreting the lyrics for you, and they're, a lot of factoids that maybe you didn't have before. So here's my compartmentalized one: just the value of the critic in the old days versus now. It's like, so in the old days, there was no time on radio for anybody to say anything. They just played the songs. It was the magazines essentially. And then you had video came along, and then there was video news and stuff. So you got to learn things later on. But in the old days, and there was also way less music. So the critic was super important in literally being the only voice to tell you what's out there, and then giving you a critique of it. And I've said this a lot of times. I remember, a Bob Dylan album would come out sometimes, and there'd be like 3 reviews of it in one magazine. That kind of thing, where it's like, wow, okay, so I'm really getting the good digestible thing. Nowadays, I need a rock critic. Like I basically nowadays have a big thirst for having some rock critic, in a lot of different genres. Just tell me what is the top stuff to go out and listen to, because there's so much music out there. That it's just a sea of releases in all these different genres, where it's like, okay, I now need somebody. And then if you go try to look it up yourself, you're going to get one guy's opinion, and he's got all his biases, and there's the politics, and is he just super cool and giving you the snobby stuff? Like, what is the great stuff, right? So and how do you find, that good encapsulated, view of the top 10 in this particular subgenre or whatever? And then finally, the other thing is, the value of the rock critic all goes down a little in a way now, because you could just go on Spotify or YouTube and go check it all out yourself. Anyways, you don't need the critic to literally safeguard your dollars, that you have to go spend, and kind of make sure you spend them intelligently as you did in the old days. So that's the old and the new. I mean, there were reasons to need the critics in the old days, and there's reasons to need them now. And I think now it's more so just to literally just cut down the time. I'll give you one other quick example. We were talking on our little industry email group the other day about the Live and Dangerous 8 CD version coming out, right? And we're all complaining. It's like, who is ever going to listen to that? And why would you listen to that? It's basically the same track listing throughout. And I made the point, and this feels the same way with Led Zeppelin. I would like an expert like a Dave Lewis with Led Zeppelin, or Butch with Thin Lizzy, maybe, right? But the idea is literally, I would love to have someone go curate all those Led Zeppelin bootlegs, find all the great stuff. The first time they did this, the time they played this in an early version before the album came out, the last time they played this, something happened at this gig. It was their first gig in South Africa or something or whatever. Or listen to what Jimmy does here. Listen to what John Bonham does here. This is the only time they played this particular old obscure blues cover. I would love to see a Zeppelin box set where you've got a good rock critic writes 400 or 500 words and curates and finds those 50 amazing magic Led Zeppelin songs, from the live situation, and these are the ones you got to listen to, so I don't have to sift through them all. And same with that Thin Lizzy thing. It's like, how are you going to compare, or what are you even going to find in 8 versions of Jailbreak that are different, that are interesting to you, kind of thing, right? So yeah, you need people to curate. That's a big thing of critic curation, right?
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned kind of like the old way of doing it versus the new way. I mean, I remember, we've both been reviewing albums since the 90s. And I remember back in the old days, the early days of Sea of Tranquility, it's like you would have an album that you'd listen to X number of times, and you go to put a review. And, I used to be of the mindset that, like, I need to go and tell everybody track by track exactly what they're going to expect, what it sounds like, how long the guitar solos are, which ones have this, which ones have that. And before you know it, you've got this epic 4 or 5 paragraph, however many word review that literally it's going to take you 10 minutes to read, right? And then you're basically telling the listener exactly what they're in store for, to the best of your opinion, right? Based on how you're hearing it. And over the years, I've seen people like not want to go through all that anymore. And when we decided to do the YouTube channel back in 2014 and actually do this in a shorter format on video, I struggled for years. Well, how long does a video review need to be where you're actually talking about it? Because, I found out over the years that, what, you could probably say in 5 minutes all that needs to be said about an album, whatever it might be, right? So, the new Clutch, right? I think my review was like 5 minutes, right? Maybe 6. And I basically gave some of the highlights. I may have compared it to how it sounds to the last couple of albums, and said a couple nice things that piqued people's interest. And the result of that is you're either going to watch that, you're either a Clutch fan, you're going to go buy it, you're maybe a casual Clutch fan, and I said enough interesting things to make you want to go check it out, or you're not a Clutch fan at all, but something about it seemed interesting to you. So, but you got to hook the people, because I think one of the differences now as opposed to 20, 30 years ago is people's attention span is much different. You mentioned it before, there's a million things coming out. We've got information flying at us left and right. So the person who can say the most in the least amount of time or the least amount of space and words is probably going to get their point across that much quicker and easier, right? I mean, that's just the way it seems to me. So I've had to kind of like, even when I do written reviews now, it's like the days of like 4 or 5 paragraphs are over for me. And I don't know how many, we have lots of people who write for Sea of Tranquility, the website. Some people will have lots to say in a paragraph. Others will do these big epics. And, again, it's personal preference on how you want to kind of put these things together. But you have to wonder, well, the viewers, the readers, how much are they willing to sift through to come to a conclusion on their own based on what we've had to say. So now when I do a written review, it's maybe a paragraph and a half, because I've learned in doing them verbally and video medium that sometimes you can say more with less, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Clutch thing brings up an interesting point I wanted to make. So like I've interviewed Neil a bunch of times, and I interviewed Neil for this album, right? So inherently, when you see my review and my opinion, I'll use that knowledge and it'll be a richer experience because I kind of know what Neil thinks, right? But I also wrote the story using all of Neil's quotes. So as soon as I give you that story, we're on equal ground, right? Yeah. Like, you know what Neil said just as much as I know what Neil said, because I just shared it with you. I just gave you his whole thing. So
it's no longer inside information to you anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. So anytime I do a book, I just pulled out, here's the new deal book, right? So, people constantly, this happens all the time, and it drives me a little crazy, right? So I'll do a book, and the person will buy the book and they'll read the book and go, "Oh, I loved your book. This is crazy. Did he say anything about this?" It's like, well, you know what? I gave you everything he said. I don't have anything else. I gave you all the good stuff. I wasn't holding anything back. So, we're kind of on equal ground here. And now now having read the book and having read, dozens of pages on each Dio album in the 90s, like you know a lot about this, so you're now an expert on it too, right? So that's another key point is any of us who are critics who have read a bunch of books on bands and have retained that knowledge, that's the other key thing. You have to retain it. Or if you're doing homework, as long as you have, if you even own a bunch of research materials, you're ahead of the game, and you should be listened to, and your opinion matters, because you can go back and do that research that's maybe not on the internet, and that stuff will come out when you do the In the Prog Seat or whatever, right? I prepared because I pulled these things out of Bill Bruford's book, right? And other people might never have seen that or forgot about it, kind of thing. But so, yeah, that Clutch example is kind of interesting. And I feel the same way like when you have Ian Anderson on, or Dennis DeYoung on, or whatever, right? It's like all of a sudden you're still being a rock critic, but you've moved into that role of the guy helping facilitate and delivering the facts. So you've got opinion over here and you've got facts. And so now Pete is being the guy delivering facts. But at the same time, Pete on a different show will have some opinion. And on this show, Dennis has some opinion about the stick, about sticks, right? So Dennis's opinions are super valuable because he's literally in the band. But then again, he's not Tommy and he's not JY, so he's not giving you their opinions. Pete may be in a better position, having maybe read some Styx books and having interviewed Dennis, that when he tells you about Grand Illusion, he's able to, bring all this stuff in and give you a good, rich, educated opinion on that thing. And you may be hearing a bunch of stuff you didn't hear before. And that's the value of the critic. Again, you're now going to go back to Grand Illusion because someone pretty smart who's synthesized a lot of information and giving you a lot of factoids and his own opinion is now making your appreciation of Grand Illusion that much richer, sort of thing. So
yeah, and you bring up a good point about being a facilitator, right? When you're interviewing someone of known stature like a Dennis DeYoung or a Rob Halford, or whoever it might be, right? Quite frankly, a lot of people say, I love the way you interview these musicians and bands and whatnot. It's like you really get the best out of them. And I'm like, well, because you're not there to listen to me, right? I have them on the show for a reason, is to hear them talk and tell their stories. I said, my job is just to facilitate the conversation. You come up with interesting questions that are going to interest them to want to tell their story. Because to me, that's the only reason to have them on, right? That's really the only reason. You don't want to hear me. I go and I watch interviews with lots of these musicians all across YouTube, and I see these hosts who talk over their guests and basically take up the whole conversation and don't even let them talk. Why have them on? People hear enough from me during the week, right? So when I have a special guest like that on, I want to hear them talk. I want to hear them talk just as much as you, the viewer, right? So I'm going to come up with questions that'll get them talking. You're going to hear minimal out of me because I don't need to be, that much part of the conversation. And I get all the time, I get people, well, what was it like to talk to Dennis DeYoung? What was it like to talk to Dee Snider? You saw the interview. That's what it was like. It's no mystery, right? That's like, it was fun for me as well. Exactly, I also get a lot. They're like, well, did any of them share any, tidbits, special things off camera? And that very rarely happens. The one time it did happen was and I could probably talk about it now because it's old news at this point, but I was interviewing John Petrucci from Dream Theater, I don't know, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. And I asked him a question, I was like, any chance of you and Mike Portnoy and Rudess and Tony Levin putting Liquid Tension Experiment back together? And he was just like, he looked uncomfortable and he goes, maybe we could talk about that off camera. I'm like, okay. And then off camera, he told me that it was already in the works and the album had already been recorded very secretly because nobody knew about this. Mm-hmm. And the questions that I got from people like, well, what did he have to say? What did he have to say? I had to keep my mouth shut, right? Yeah. I think he announced it like a month later, but I was like, oh, okay. I just happened to guess, right? I had no idea, but that rarely happens.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is when you're a deep fan of someone, your questions will be way better than the casual fan, right? So you're going to get the stuff that people, on your level who watch your show, you want to hear, right?
Yeah. And, you mentioned Ian Anderson before, and that was kind of a difficult one for me. I'm a huge fan for one, but if you've seen any interviews with Ian Anderson over the last couple of years, and he does a ton of them, he gets asked the same questions over and over again. And you get the feeling that he's just like completely bored with the conversations and the questions. Yeah. So I tried very hard to come up with stuff that, because I watched a bunch of them that he has not been asked, to get him out of his shell a little bit, because he seems like he's in a shell. And like for the first 10 minutes of my interview with him, he was a little on the quiet side and kind of matter of fact. And then I think he all of a sudden realized like, wow, I'm getting asked some different things here, so I can maybe open up and talk a little bit more. Mm-hmm. That's very, very important as well. So I try to do that, as much as I possibly can.
Yeah. All right, I got a couple other funny little compartmentalized points. So again, if the theme is who cares what you think, sort of thing, right? So I have a book like this, the top 250 heavy metal songs of the 80s, right? So one thing that I've done in the past is compromised in a way of by saying, okay, who cares what you think? Let me take a poll first, right? So it's kind of cool that sometimes you can take a big poll, like I did here for this, and the top 500 heavy metal song albums of all time book from 2004 and all this. So I said, I'm going to find out what all of you think first of all, and I'm going to include your opinions in this by having the ranking come out of a poll position, right? But then I go and review all the songs. So I'm literally writing reviews of songs, which is a very abstract thing to do, and can be very, uh, very subjective, I suppose, when you're reviewing a song versus an album or whatever. Just like when we've talked about how do you review a guitar solo, right? But again, so that brings up the point again. People have asked me many times, "Oh, you got to do a book on the top guitar solos." It's like, no, there's people out there who are actual guitarists. Let them do it. They're the ones who should do it. But they have to be good explainers, and they have to be, or explainers on a video show or writers in a book, right? So not every guitarist who's a great guitarist could even do that, but some can, like a Sean Kelly could, right? Because he's now writing books and stuff, and like I say, he's done an amazing job on our contrarian shows, right? So that's funny. Yeah, I've thought to do a book of the top prog albums, right? And literally, just go get a poll and find out what they are first and do that. And we've, when we do the contrarian shows, we often, give people the rankings, say, well, this is what the world out there thinks. So it takes a little bit of that subjectivity away from it. And that again, just, to lay down that thing about, opinion versus factoids, hard facts, bringing that part of the rock critic to it. So when you deliver the hard facts, you're just being a facilitator. But when we all just spend our lives soaking up this music, like, I mean, we essentially do become experts on certain things, right? And that's why you listen to us, right? And actually, one more point to make on that is the other reason you listen to us or don't is that over time you find out if your tastes align with our tastes, right? So when your tastes are aligning, that's when you pay more attention. When your tastes are not aligning, you dismiss what I think about fusion, right?
Right.
Or whatever, or Wilco or Radiohead, like all these massive bands, critics' darlings bands that I know nothing about. Bob Dylan for you, right? So every Bob Dylan fan who even likes Pete and loves so many things and it's taken so many opinions from you, if you started blathering on about Bob Dylan, they know to check out, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point too, because and I'll use our show here as a perfect example. You see comments all the time from people who are like, I love watching you two guys, even if half the time I disagree with everything you talk about. So when does it become the opinions or the delivery of the personalities outweighs what they're actually talking about, what they have opinions on? Right?
Yeah.
Like you will watch that person or these people or that panel week in and week out. I mean, a perfect example. There was one person, I don't know, a week or so ago, who commented that they watched the Hudson Valley Squares and In the Prague Seat religiously every week. In most cases, they don't care at all about any of the music that we're talking about, but they just love watching the group and they love the laughs and the camaraderie. And I was thinking, I'm like, I don't know if I would do that. I don't know if I would watch like a channel or a show week in and week out if I had no interest whatsoever in the topic at all, from week to week, but I just like the personalities. I don't know if I would do that, but I guess that's a part of it as well, right?
Yeah. But also, you're liking those personalities, but when you respect their knowledge base and their opinion, even if it's something, some kind of music that you previously had dismissed, you're gonna pay a little bit of attention and go, wow, he's really loving that thing, or Lynn thinks that album is amazing, right? And you're listening and you're going, geez, they're raving about this thing like it's the greatest thing that ever was, even if it's not the greatest album of all time, it obviously has got something. So I better go check it out, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so you will. I mean, you basically learn eventually whose opinion you respect, and then based on the way it's delivered and how much smart stuff they say about it, you go, well, I guess they really kind of know what they're talking about, and we should check that out, right?
Yeah, yeah. And and one thing too, I do want to mention, there are some people who will listen to opinions from folks like us, and what they're expecting is a summary of what the general consensus in the whole universe is. And one of the things that I struggle sometimes to get into people is that, well, for instance, I'll use it. I did a show a couple years ago on my favorite 30 albums of all time, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you say your favorite, right, what does that mean? These are the ones that you like the most. You realize there's a ton more out there, and you realize there's a ton more that maybe the general public might pick as theirs. That doesn't matter. They're my favorites. And then people will be like, well, you listed this album by this band. It's like, but their other albums sold millions of copies. Why would you not pick that? Or, this other album is listed as one of the most influential albums of all time. How could you leave it off? Or how could you leave off this band? It's like, well, because when you use, it's one thing if you say top, or you use historical or whatever, and you say favorite. It's a different thing. But again, going back to people gravitating towards personalities they trust, and they can see their passion and their knowledge about, when they see something favorites, they're like, well, this person thinks very highly of this, so maybe I should give it some consideration too in what I listen to, or I should go seek that out, that sort of thing. So in a lot of instances, people just, they care about what you have to say based on history you have with them, or history you've given them, showing them your passion, showing them your knowledge. That something like a favorites list or episode or whatnot is not taken literally, like these are the best, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love your thing about we all hear things differently, right? It's like, and I got to tell you a funny one that just happens so often that I'm just wondering what, like, we really hear all things differently. I've probably brought this up before, but I'm amazed at how hard it is to talk about production and have people agree on productions.
Sure. Yeah.
It's nuts, right? So again, just to go to an earlier point, we value the opinions of producers. I love talking to producers and finding out, why a certain album sounds a certain way. So now you understand a little more about it. Like, oh, they use that kind of echo or that kind of board or whatever. Or the drums were mic'd up this way, or there were egg cartons on the wall, or they lowered an anvil into some water and hit it, and all that kind of stuff, right? So all of that stuff, enriches your appreciation. But again, just by us being such super fans and being so into this stuff, we can talk pretty expertly on production, and every album we review, everything we talk about, we can talk about the production. We can talk about the guitar tones and where the cymbals right, how much treble is on there, how much of it is crammed into the mid-range, how much bass is there. Can you hear bass articulation? Can you hear the notes, or is it just bass sound and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we all hear things differently. I literally have been in so many situations with super smart people, and I'll say this about the production. I'll say A, and they'll say something completely down at Y, like completely different. And I'm going, are our ears physically hearing this stuff differently? Because this is just bizarre to me, right?
Well, that's the senses, though, right? I was just thinking, like, our hearing is no different than our sense of smell, right? There are some people that love the smell of coffee. There are some people like myself who can't stand the smell of coffee. I meet people who are like, I love going to the gas station and putting gas in my car. I love the smell of gasoline. And I'm like, what? And like, how could that possibly be? But because we all, our senses are all different, and the way the sound or the smells go into the brain, it's we all process things differently. So that's why, it's something. I think the first reaction is like, really? How are you hearing it that way? Like there are times where a new album comes out and I listen to it and I'm like, wow, this big, bright, airy production. I love it. And then you talk to someone else, it's like, it sounds muddy and compressed. And I'm like, really? How are you hearing it that way? But that's the way. I mean, you and I have had differences many times in the past about, production and things and whatnot. It's the way it is. And it should, I think our first gut reaction is to think, well, how can you be hearing it that way? But then based on everything else we know about the way we react to sounds and smells, it's perfectly natural. So we shouldn't second guess anybody who maybe hears it a little bit differently or sees it differently or smells it differently. That's just, it's just the way it goes. But I also like your comment about how being such fans of the music for so long, and you with the history of playing drums and me with guitars, it's like, you can hear little things that maybe other people can't. The difference between a Fender Stratocaster, Telecaster, or Gibson Les Paul in a recording, right? The fact, are they using a flanger? Is that fuzz or is that a distortion pedal? Is that wah-wah? Maybe some people might be able to tell the difference between a Vox wah-wah and a Crybaby wah-wah, right? I don't think I'm that good, but some people can. Whether it's certain way they're hitting certain cymbals and things like that, whether that's a Hammond organ or a Farfisa organ, right? Is that a Mellotron Mark II, or is that, all this kind of weird stuff. But that also helps if you have that background, either as a musician or from just listening to so much for so many years. You've trained your ears to really pick up on that. And I like when you were talking before about how listening to music, and it's hard, listening to music multiple times in a row, and each time pick a song, each time I'm only going to pay attention to the vocals, I'm only going to pay attention to the drums or the bass or the guitars or the keyboards. That's very hard to do unless you actually sit yourself down and consciously try to do that. Because I get lots of times I'll listen to a piece of music and then I'll talk to someone. It happens like I'll be on in the prog seat and someone will mention, oh, the drumming on that song. George Lemay will be like, did you hear the intricate drums on that passage, whatever? And I'm kind of like, I didn't get that at all. I actually have to go back and really stop myself and listen very carefully. And I'm like, oh, yeah, he's right. But I didn't catch it the first time around because I really wasn't paying attention other than the overall delivery of the song or the music from the whole band. It's really hard to just kind of separate yourself and get your ears trained to just cut out everything else other than that one aspect of it.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. I mean, when you were talking about wah-wah, so you can go listen to some Uriah Heep and you can listen to some Mick Box but you could point out that Mick Box uses a lot of wah-wah, and who else uses a lot of wah-wah? Kirk Hammett, Tony Iommi, or whatever. So every time you listen to that Uriah Heep song, now that Pete's told you about wah-wah and is giving you this little story, A, you know a little bit more about Mick Box's personality. B, you're going to think of Kirk Hammett, you're going to think of Tony Iommi. So it's a little bit like I love watching a UFC fight, for example, right? But it's even better if I at least get the tail of the tape and you see their heights and their weights and what country they're from and their reach. And then it's even a little better if you happen to, hear the little backstory about where they're from and you watch them train and all that stuff. So all of a sudden you're set up and you're enjoying that fight more because you're rooting for somebody, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with a band. The more Pete tells you about Mick Box, the more he tells you about, oh, he lived in Australia or whatever, and he's the smiling Buddha of Uriah Heep, and he's the only original member and all this sort of stuff. Now, next time you hear track 7 on that CD and you hear the guitar solo, you're going to think of all these things about Mick Box, and your experience of this song is like way richer all of a sudden, when you might not even be a guitar player, not even thought about the guitar solo, but now you're going, oh, wah-wah, listen to that, and oh, here's what Pete told me about this guy, right?
And now that person can have a credible conversation with someone else, and they've added some new little bit of factoid and knowledge to their conversations about the music that they really like, that maybe they didn't know before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what it really comes down to, again, going back to the original question, do our opinions matter? I think over time with any rock critic, you basically will eventually realize what those guys are quote unquote experts on. And so you're gonna listen to their opinions more on that topic and any adjacent topics close by. And again, the further you get from the ripple, the less you're going to check out. You're not going to listen to them. You're going to go, I happen to know Martin knows about as much about that as I know about that, which isn't very much. So I ain't learning anything here because we're on the same ground, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. It's about being specialized. And I think that works in all aspects of life, right? Do what you do and do it really, really well. Because when you try and do too much and a lot of the stuff you're doing or talking about, you don't know all that well, people can tell. All right.
Yeah.
People are not stupid. And so I've, yeah, in all aspects of life, that's kind of my belief. It's like do what you do and what you know and do it really well. And when you
Yeah.
start to take on more than you're, knowledgeable on in whatever it is you do, whether it's your career or hobbies or whatever, you're absolutely right. It starts to thin out, right? Yeah.
It's a really good point because when I do the podcast, the History in 5 Songs, which is audio and it's me just talking really fast for like 25 minutes kind of thing, right? Um, if I have to do too much research, right? And it's not straight off the top of my head and I'm really
Reading.
excited about this topic and I know the whole thing. You can't see me looking down at my notes and reading, but I am doing that a little more, right? And then you slow down and you stumble and you're not as good at it, right? So, and on our video shows, we know that as well. We see all of ourselves looking down at our notes, right?
Yeah.
When we make these notes, and when you do that, it just means that it's not, you haven't soaked it in, and you haven't learned that by osmosis. You don't know the order of the tracks on Aerosmith Rocks just because you know them and because you learned them. They were burned into your head, back in 1976 and 1977 or whatever, right? Um, and then later on, there's piles of things you don't know about that band later on, what or whatever, right? But there's certain things. It's almost like if you were there at the time. Here's another one I wanted to bring up as well, which is kind of funny. So part of being an expert is going to see a band live, right? Seeing them a bunch of times live and that whole thing. Well, all of a sudden with YouTube, not all of a sudden, but everybody can be an expert on that, and
Yeah.
people actually don't use that enough to become an expert, right? I mean, basically, you could have that front row seat to all the historic concerts over time of a band through all their eras, and all of a sudden, that badge of honor, that thing you had back in the old days of adding to your expertdom on that band is taken away. Everybody can do it. So the fact of the matter is everybody can do a lot of great homework and come off as an expert, but like you say, it's going to be obvious that it's not coming right off the top of their head.
Yeah, yeah, that you are absolutely right. You could talk to someone now who's 22 and they weren't even born when Screaming for Vengeance was released, right? But they've watched every live clip from that tour. They've heard the album, and all of a sudden, they may either they do or they think they know just about as much as you do about Screaming for Vengeance and when it was released and all that. Even though we were obviously teenagers when it came out. We bought the album in the store when it came out. We saw the tour. We experienced all there is to experience about listening to Screaming for Vengeance and in the 80s. And yeah, that's kind of the world we live in now, right?
But if you take that guy and you go just some innocent, not even gotcha questions deep, pretty soon the knowledge crumbles, right? You say, okay, well, what were the other 5 or 10 big albums that Priest was competing with in 1982? And they'll go, I didn't look that up.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure. Right.
Yeah.
Where was MTV at? What was doing great on MTV at that time? No idea. I didn't look that up either. Right. Yeah. But I looked all this up. Right. But that's the point of all these shows we do. Right. You're only getting to see what we know about. You're not getting to see what we don't know about.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because what we know about, it's a good amount, I think. Right. I mean, at least we tend to think so. But yeah, it's
and we try not to say the same thing over and over again and do the same shows over and over again. That's the hard part, right? Finding the new things to talk about or new ways to talk about them, right?
Yeah, that is always a challenge. And it's like, sometimes, and Martin says this to me all the time. Martin's like, God, I feel like I've talked about these 3 albums ad nauseum and I don't want to keep repeating myself. And I totally get it. And we have, especially here on the channel, we have a good chunk of audience who would love us to talk about some of the same stuff over and over and over again because it really resonates with them. But I think for ourselves, we like to keep challenging ourselves. And I think, repeating what we're saying too much, we lose interest in that. So that's why we try very hard to come up with topics that are somewhat fresh. And yeah, we're going to revisit bands and albums and, you know, things on occasion. That's all part of it, but it's got to be stimulating to us as well. So it's creating content on a weekly basis is not easy for those watching. It's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you know, factor in Contrarian's history in 5 songs. You've gone on someone else's show and just talked about it or whatever, right? We've done this on Hack, you know, with Guitar Hack. So yep. we don't really want to do that same thing 2 weeks later again, kind of thing. And how long ago did you do it? And which configuration of Sea of Tranquility did you do it with, right?
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So yeah, there's so many reasons. Like, people are suggesting shows all the time to me, and it's like I get so like frantic. It's like, you really can't know the 12 or 20 reasons I can't do that show. I could type them all out for you. There's a pile of them, but it's this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason, right? And it gets really hard. Sometimes and that's why I start saying to people now, it's like, if you're going to suggest me to be on a show, you got to give me at least 5 or 6 ideas and I'll pick one, but don't just give me one, because the chances of it working, I'll complain about it for some reason or another, right? You just give me a pile and I'll pick one, right?
Yeah. When do you feel like, because I like you, I get asked constantly, and 9 times out of 10, I have to politely say no, because I just don't have the bandwidth anymore. I really don't. I feel bad, but I just don't. When do you get to a point where, like,
what do you mean the bandwidth?
As far as like how much time I can dedicate to it, like I'm like bandwidth, meaning I'm tapped. Like, in other words, I get asked to be on 5 YouTube shows or podcasts a week, right? Most of which I've never even heard of before. And, they're basically, what they want to do is they want me to come on and talk about shit that I've talked about on here or on Hack or wherever, many, many times. And I just, and I politely say, listen, I'm running programming 7 days a week. I work a full-time job. I've got a second channel, right? Comic Book Geezers. I said, I just don't have the time. I feel bad. I just don't have the time. And I wish I did, I wish I did, because, so it's fun. It's not like I don't like doing it. I just don't have the time, right? Because the more I start saying yes to all of these invitations, then I don't have the time to do what I have to do. And that's got to take priority. So for folks watching who wonder why I say no so often, that's why. It's not that I don't want to.
And some of the ones that I will go on and want to go on, sometimes I get a little bit like, okay, push yourself, come up with a better idea, like just be a little more creative about it. Let's not just rank the albums again, or let's not, the one I never really wrap my head around. I don't like doing this when I see it a lot, is comparing this album by this band to this album by this other band. Like that 1-to-1 2 thing, if there's no real relation between them, you know what I mean? And you can create some interesting relations between them, but
sure.
You can do that if they're really close together and they were up against each other for one reason or another. But there's certain shows that just, like, I go, nah, I'm just not feeling it. My standard line is, it's too random sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And again, back on this being a rock critic, right? How many, I know this happens to you all the time, but someone recommends an album to you, right? Go listen to this album, right? And it's like, sometimes I go, you know what? It's like you leading me out into a forest in fall and pointing to one leaf on the ground, and we're all going to hang out and talk about that leaf, right? Yeah. It's like, there's so many millions. How do you even have a clue if this particular 5-level subgenre of progressive metal is even something I care about at all anymore, right? Like, how you don't know my taste even remotely, right? And then one album, it's like, no, forget it. Like, there's just so much out there. And why am I doing this? Do I now have to close down a bunch of windows and go listen to this right now? Because if I don't, I'm gonna forget to do it later. Right?
Yeah, I get that all the time, and I'm always like, thanks, but I've got 30 things here I've got to listen to over the next couple of weeks, and it's like, but I think their hope is that you will listen to it and love it as much as they do, and then come on the air and talk about it and say, oh, and one of our viewers recommended this. And it's just like, but I get like 100 of those a day. I'm like, there's just no way. There's just no way. And then, another topic that people always want either to have me come on their show to talk about or to talk about more on SOT. Why don't you talk about the underrated bands? It's like, but what makes them underrated? We have kind of tackled that subject on a few occasions, and we have a hard time with that. This whole thing of underrated. What makes them underrated? It's should they have been bigger? There's a ton of those bands, but how much can you continually talk about that?
Yeah. It's a tough one. Just keeping up, coming up for interesting things to say. But yeah, so that's about all I had in my notes. I don't think I have much else, but I think we covered off most things.
Martin and I have become very, very good, and because I know I haven't until 2 seconds ago when I looked at the clock, we have become really good at finishing these conversations in like exactly an hour, week in and week out. Martin, I tell you, we have gotten very good at this in 2+ years of doing this. So So I think we covered all the bases here. I think before we end, I want to circle back to the very beginning where you're talking about the whole NFL analogy. And I'm going to put it in baseball terms, right? Because I know baseball better than football. And it perfectly reflects a conversation I had with my wife, like real recently. We were talking about, or she brought it up. She was talking about the Mets manager, Buck Showalter. And then she was talking about, she was asking, was he a player? Was he like a really popular, good baseball player before he became a manager? Because she goes, it seems to me like most good managers should have been really good players. And I was like, yeah, he was a very nondescript player. I don't think he really made much of an impact at all in the major leagues, but became a coach and worked his way up there. And she goes, oh, that's kind of weird. She goes, it's just like, the announcers for the Mets. So we've got Keith Hernandez, Ron Darling, and Gary Cohen. She goes, I know Keith and Ron were players for the Mets and really good players, but how did a guy like Gary Cohen get this gig? He was never a player. And I'm like, well, Keith and Ron are the former players who know all the ins and outs of the games because they took part in it, right? Gary grew up being an enormous Mets fan and knows everything about the game of baseball and the Mets inside and out going back 50 years. So here you have this really good dynamic, right? Of someone who is, like you mentioned, who's an analyst but never was part of the game, and two guys who were a big part of the game, and specifically that team. So, and that is, I think, for me, and a lot of people feel this way, what makes them probably the best baseball announcing team in Major League Baseball.
So the point is to get the greatest opinion on everything. You want a producer, you want a guy in the band, you want a great guitarist, you want a great drummer, you want super fans like us, which is essentially how we got here, right? So you want all of that together. And I just quickly on the NFL thing, I've seen some really great NFL analysis of just young kids who have just analyzed the game to death and put together a YouTube video where, okay, that's as good as I would have seen, watching an actual NFL game, their analysis. So you can become an expert on something and not having played the game, right?
Yeah. And that's why, a show like In the Prog Seat here on the channel works so well, and why we have such a really cool panel, because you've got folks on the panel who are musicians themselves, and they know the ins and outs of all of that. I've got one guy who owns a label, right? A record label, and he knows all the bands, knows the ins and outs of the industry like nothing. And then you've got supplemented with a bunch of true fans of the genre. And it makes for a great combination. Same thing on Hudson Valley Squares, right? You got a couple of musicians, you got a couple of real fans, you got someone like Chris Sallow who's written for 20 magazines and done all sorts of stuff, and it makes for a great combination. It makes for great conversations, and it's not always easy to get a group like that together. That can give you that output week after week and have all these different experiences that they bring to the table. That makes it, for the viewer, it makes the opinions really matter, and they want to come back week after week, day after day.
Yeah. Cool. Nice.
Here we go. All right. So, Martin, update us on books, podcasts, Contrarians, what you got going on over there?
Yeah, so the last History in 5 Songs was about trivia about title tracks, weird things about title tracks with a lot of examples. The books are all at martinpopoff.com. And if you don't care what I think, most of what's in those books is the bands talking themselves. So there's a lot of facts in it. Just ignore my opinions on things in the books if you don't want that part of it. But there's a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with me, right? So yeah, that's all at martinpopoff.com. Contrarians, yeah, it's just ticking along. There's some Dark Horse album stuff coming out that's gone up, but yeah, that's I guess the Dio book is the latest book, and then the two Alice Coopers and the Dams. So and working on some panel books again, which again is this whole discussion about critics and experts and stuff, and I'm learning a ton of things about these bands we're talking about simply by listening to other fans. So there you go.
Sounds good. Lots going on. So thanks for watching, everybody. What do we got coming up here? So tomorrow on the UK Connection, we're going to dip back into AOR melodic rock. So we're going to take a look at 3 AOR melodic rock gems. One is a classic, one is a kind of more of an underground, and one is a melodic rock album released by an artist that you wouldn't expect to do that. So we're talking about Journey, Heat, and Share. That's coming up tomorrow on the UK Connection. And then we've got on Sunday, we've got Ranking the Albums, George Lamy, Ken Golden, and myself from In the Prog Seed and For Fusion Friday. We're going to be talking about a very cool band from France called Morgable. If you haven't listened to Morgable, you really need to, and you need to check out this episode. It's a instrumental power trio, metal, fusion, jazz, prog, avant-garde, all roll into one with one of the most amazing guitar players you've never heard in your life. So check out on Sunday. We're going to rank the 7 albums of Morgable, and then we will kickstart the work week off with a very fun episode of the Hudson Valley Square. Actually, we're doing it on both Hudson Valley Squares and In the Prog Seat next week. Everybody's going to come to the table with a list of 10 bands, 9 of whom they've seen live in their lifetime. The other one they're lying about they've never seen. Each person on the panel is going to have to try and guess who that one band is from each person. And that's happening on Monday on Hudson Valley Squares and on Tuesday on In the Prog Seat. So stay tuned for that. Some lighthearted stuff in Thanksgiving week next week here in the States. So till then, visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody, here at the Funhouse. We'll see you real soon. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.